unless you get like lucky and fall ass backwards into product market fit on your first try, then I think going depth first too early is a waste of time until you have product market fit.
Hello friends, Jess here from Seed Club. Welcome to Season 3 of Building at the Edges. We host conversations with the top innovators, thinkers, and builders at the intersection of crypto and community. I'm excited to bring you this conversation with Kevin Owocki, formerly of Gitcoin. There is real value in this episode for builders of DAOs. Kevin took Gitcoin from an idea, a platform, a centralized company, a part of the consensus world, to launching and distributing tokens and ownership and governance, and to being one of the leading DAOs in the ecosystem. I think there's a ton of value in this episode to explore that transition. How do we go from centralized company to decentralized DAO? All the twists and turns of how decisions and change happens in those organizations, especially as we go from bull market into bear market. So easy for DAOs to say yes, kind of harder to say no. We talk about Trustware versus Socialware, this sort of management or DAO stack, and the importance of the two when building internet native organizations. We also got Kevin to dive into Sybil Resistance, why that matters. It's a big, big deal. Solving that effectively unlocks many things. I think Kevin's answer is one that gives us both hope and optimism, but also I think a reality check. Kevin's just a wealth of experience in the types of things that I think many of us are really passionate about exploring or doing, building something people want to be a part of, and navigating the twists and turns that are required to actually get that thing out into the world and to consistently provide value. So I know you'll enjoy this conversation with Kevin Owocki. Let's get into it. Kevin, welcome to the pod.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. You were so generous to have me on Green Pill, which is a podcast that you host maybe a month or so back now. And I think we had a real rich conversation there. And now I'm really excited to be able to kind of turn the focus to you, because I think there's just been so many interesting threads that you've been sort of not just pulling on, kind of at the core of. And maybe that's where I would love to sort of start things. I think most folks associate you with Gitcoin. I know you've since sort of moved on to doing some new things, which we can talk about a bit later on. But I think if we sort of zoom out a little bit, we just come out of this, intense period of excitement and hype and interest. But there was earlier days and maybe quieter, calmer days. I don't know if those actually existed in crypto, but a different world with which sort of Gitcoin, the idea, emerged from. And so I would love if you could take us back to that world and maybe talk a little bit about the original idea behind Gitcoin, what you were trying to do at that point.
Totally. Well, so I have a computer science degree from University of Delaware in 2006. And I basically have been like hacking on startups my entire, since I was like 14, I was like running web startups out of my parents' house. I learned pretty early on that you can make more money on the internet than you can working like as a bag boy at the supermarket or like as a busboy at a restaurant. In fact, I had a couple nights when I was like a teenager where I would like make more money off the internet from my online business than I would being a busboy. So I just got into like hacking and like trying to build revenue opportunities, passive income, I guess it would be called, in the early 2000s. Used my computer science degree after school. They kind of ushered me into corporate America. And I just thought that corporate America was what you did after you went to school. I didn't realize startups were a thing. And thank God I got accepted into Techstars, which was a startup studio, startup accelerator in 2008, that I basically joined these two guys who were running an online dating website, which was pretty crazy. I like following the career trajectory of like online dating website in my 20s. In my 30s, I'm running a jobs founding site. Like I'm gonna have to like try to like revolutionize healthcare with Web3 in my 40s or something like that, or like insurance or something boring. Anyway, I learned to run a double-sided marketplace going through Techstars, raised a couple $1 million, had a team of 10 on my engineering team. I was the CTO, and that kind of like imploded, but it kind of got me into like the Web2 CTO racket. I would lead engineering teams. I would hire engineers, sometimes fire engineers, depending on how it was going. And what I realized was that there was a huge market for talent. There's so much demand for engineering talent, and the market is totally inefficient. You've got these like zero value add intermediaries and these recruiters that basically just buy $100 a month LinkedIn subscriptions, and then they sell you the engineers for like $30K a month. It's crazy, the markup on that. And I was like, oh man, there's got to be a better way. Like I hired 45 software engineers in the 10 years I was a Web2 CTO. And once I learned to create my own deal flow, I was like, man, this is the ticket. Like not only am I not paying $30K per pop for engineers, I'm also like, I had a recruiter that like tried to recruit some of my engineers out from under me after I hired them. And I was like, yeah, like fuck this. I'm not like doing recruiters anymore. And then the other insight was that everything I was building as a Web2 CTO is based off of open source software. And it just felt like this crazy value asymmetry where like $400 billion per year in economic value is created by open source. But all the people I know who maintain open source packages were like, yeah, it sucks. I can't make any money on it. Like, I have to go work a day job and then go work on open source nights and weekends away from my family. And so those were the two things that, like, when blockchain came around, I was like, oh, I'm going to try this Gitcoin thing and see if we can't solve those problems. And so I started Gitcoin in 2017 with some of the money I made on the 2017 bull market. At the time, we were a bounty network, and I was coming off of like 5 failed side projects at that point. I just like kept taking at bats, and we were a bounty network. And like the idea was like, if you post a task X and you say, I will give you Y coins, then that was a bounty. And this is, by the way, it's called Gitcoin. It's because like you're getting coins each time you're supporting open source software with either a bounty, and then like later we pivoted to grants. Yeah, I mean, it was just a side hustle until I convinced Joe Lubin to fund it and hire a staff of 10 people to work on Gitcoin. And I'm super happy that I did, because I went from like only my friends in Colorado using Gitcoin to MetaMask and like Truffle using Gitcoin. It's like the Ethereum Foundation. I was like, oh, this is like a step up in legitimacy now that I have access to Joe Lubin's Rolodex. And I just kept like trying shit. Like, we just kept iterating, and our mission was always to grow open source software and support digital public goods. But the way that we did it evolved from bounties to like, we had an NFT platform, we had an ethical ad platform, and Gitcoin grants was like the 4th thing that we tried. So like the story of Gitcoin is like 5 failed side projects, and then Gitcoin, and then like 4 failed funding mechanisms, and then Gitcoin grants, and then iterating 14 rounds of Gitcoin grants, actually 15 rounds of Gitcoin grants funding, and just like crazily iteration towards market fit. And luckily, I think we have some semblance of product market fit now, but it's still evolving. Like, we learned in Gitcoin grants round 7 that if we're going to have a public goods funding infrastructure for the ecosystem, it needs to be credibly neutral. And so I just built the entire fucking organizational stack and tech stack wrong. As of Gitcoin grants round 7, we've delivered $70 million worth of public goods funding to the Ethereum ecosystem. But how does people know that Kevin's not in the back, like twisting the knobs to make the funding go to his favorite projects? You need credible neutrality if you're going to have a decentralized pillar of a decentralized ecosystem. So we had to turn the great Gitcoin grants from a company to a DAO, which is like a totally different governance stack, which, by the way, there is no governance stack for DAOs. You have to invent it. And then you have to rewrite the entire platform to be decentralized and modular instead of monolithic. So I don't know. That's my like ranty telescoping view of how I got to Gitcoin. But I think the relevant message for Seed Club is just like, I just didn't give up. I mean, I think that like Gitcoin's kind of a far out idea, and I just had to like really want it and be persistent to get to it. And I also got really lucky to get there. I don't know, what about that resonates with you and your starting of Seed Club and other ventures?
I love both the energy with which you told that story and how I think the realness of it, because
got a lot of chaotic good over here.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
For folks who can't see, he's drinking, I'm assuming, the 14th cup of coffee he's been on today after.
Yeah, I'm a tea guy. It allows me to, since it has a 1/4 of the caffeine of coffee, I can have way more of them. But anyway, sorry, you're about to make an observation, and now we're just
I think like this idea of building something building towards product market fit in a ecosystem that is building towards product market fit, I think is just such a real thing that people feel across, like regardless of what part of the Web3 or crypto ecosystem you're building in. So I think like that story kind of captures that, right? Like there's just, maybe that's my core question is like, a thing that I talk to a lot of our teams about and think a lot about myself is just like how and when to build deep foundations and when to maintain optionality, or maybe how to balance off those two things. And I think in your story there, I'm hearing like, it's almost like, and push back on this if I'm wrong, like you're trying to build foundations. And then if those foundations are all of a sudden seen to be weak or crumbly in certain areas, you're very happy and maybe lucky and to be in a position where you could actually knock them down and rebuild them again. But I'm curious to your thought about this balancing of optionality versus deep foundations, especially when it comes to building product, right? It's very different if you're saying, here's our community, we're on this big adventure together. But if you're investing big resources into tech stacks, et cetera, like there's big commitments there.
Oh man, there's so much there. I mean, so basically it's almost like, I don't know how much of your audience is computer scientists, but there's like this difference between depth first tree traversal and breadth first tree traversal, which is like, one is that you have a root node and then you go down a branch and then you go down another branch, and that's like breadth first traversal. But a depth first traversal is like you have it go down a branch and then you go down a branch and then you go down a branch and then you go down a branch, and that's depth first. And there's an exploration of a design space that happens when you either go deep or broad in that design space. And just the situational awareness that you get from going breadth first, like when I'm in a project that's 0 to 1, I'm pretty breadth first about how I'm doing it, because I'm exploring the idea maze. And like, by the way, I'm going to make your engineers, like the engineers in Seed Club, cringe, and they're going to really hate what I'm about to say. But like, I don't fucking write unit tests for my code. I'm just exploring a design space, and like, I'm going to ship it to prod tonight, and we're going to see if the customers use it. And I'm going to be fast as shit because I'm shipping it to prod, and I've tested it rigorously. And by the way, I wouldn't recommend doing this with anything that like holds user funds or anything like that. There's a certain amount of managing risk as you're taking shortcuts that happens in a 0-to-1 organization. Part of the reason why Gitcoin's code base is kind of like has been hard for the team to maintain is because like I'm a sloppy coder and I coded most of the original one. And that's another reason why it's being rewritten from top to bottom. But unless you get like lucky and fall ass backwards into product market fit on your first try, then I think going depth first too early is a waste of time until you have product market fit. When you actually have resources and you found product market fit, then you can go depth first. Now, it's almost like the difference not only between depth first and breadth first, but between the empirical and a priori knowledge gathering. Empirical is through experience knowledge gathering. And that's how I traverse a design space, is like, I shipped 12 things to prod this month and I learned 6 things. Whereas I've recently learned there's another way of doing product, which is like rigorously doing customer feedback and figuring out what your customer wants and like listening really well. And if I had done that, maybe I wouldn't have had 6 failed side projects and 5 failed prototypes of Gitcoin. I would have just started with Gitcoin grants. So you can do empirical or a priori explorations of the design space. And by the way, the superpower is being able to do both. Being able to hold 2 opposite views in your mind without going insane is there's a quote about this. I think like it's the mark of an intelligence is to hold 2 opposite ideas in your mind and not go insane. Yeah, there's a great post by Chris Dixon called Getting Out of the Idea Maze. And it's for entrepreneurs who are in the idea maze of trying to figure out what their startup is. And I really recommend people reading that post if they're trying to figure out this question.
Yeah, it's interesting that even at the multiple levels of that sort of plays that, because I think we can look at maybe some of the intensity and early traction in the DeFi space as almost being false signals in many ways, right? Things that were very easy to get locked into TVL as like a indication of product market fit. So I guess there's like this other complication that gets brought in when there's incentives naturally baked into the product, and those incentives being, ownership or value or speculative value. That post is phenomenal from Chris. And I also think that it's like another layer of, awareness one needs to have around how and why people are using these things. Because I think we've seen like just a whole lot of false signals that once sort of this tide washes back out, the there was actually a lot less than maybe we had hoped.
Yeah. It turns out you didn't actually like my product. You just wanted my airdrop.
Yeah, like shocking.
That kind of stuff. Yeah.
How dare they?
Yeah.
I'm curious, so that you went from failed side projects to multiple iterations on Gitcoin, bounties to different rounds, and you're saying you're in round 15 right now. But the other piece you're sharing about is this transition from a company to a DAO, which I think is interesting. And I'm curious, like, it sounds like the intention behind that was just sort of this credible neutrality, but how to go from centralized entity to a DAO is pretty, uncharted territory. How are you thinking about the mechanisms that you were using then? And then I'm curious if you think you would use the same mechanism today.
First, I just want to pour one out for my sweet Web 2 career. It was so easy in Web 2. You just got more eyeballs and you sold ads. Like, so easy. It's just like a maximization function. Or the other model was like, get subscribers, charge them $9.99 a month, maximize their lifetime value, minimize the cost per acquisition, ramp up your marketing spend on Google, and then sell to Google or Facebook or Amazon for like $100 million. Like, that was fucking easy. Like, why are we doing this Web3 thing when we could just be doing that? Oh, right, because the incentives are all fucked up and it's a race to a technological surveillance state. Anyway, you asked me about making a DAO.
Well, the transition from, let's go from Web 2 to Web 3. It's kind of the building that you were doing there, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess like I'm an experienced Web 2 entrepreneur, and I'm kind of like shit posting on Web 2 right here. And it's to tell you about what I didn't want to do with Gitcoin. And that's like when I was running the dating site, there was a certain point where we hit like a lot of growth and we raised VC, and like the VCs were like, it's time to turn on the extraction now so we can make a return for our LPs. And like, we're like, we don't want to charge you, help. And like you just have this like situation where you're the management team and you got your investors on your right and your users on your left, and your investors are like, yo, start extracting from these users. And there's like an asymmetric value flow between the two. And so I didn't want to do that. And like, the analog here is that the consent of the governed is the only basis of legitimacy for the use of state power. And this is kind of like, as opposed to the divine right of kings that you would see in feudal times about where state power comes from. And to me, like the Web 2 thing kind of feels like state power, or like divine right of kings. Maybe it's not divine right of kings, it's like divine right of shareholders. And so I didn't want to do that. I also didn't feel like the community of Gitcoin would accept that if like, Paradigm and Consensus were taking 10% of every Gitcoin grants contribution. That didn't feel right. Oh, and the other thing is that Vitalik just wrote this post about why you would want to have a DAO. And the three answers were if you wanted to have censorship resistance, if you wanted to have credible neutrality, or if you wanted to have better decision making in concave environments. So like the other thing that Gitcoin's community needed was credible neutrality. And, arguably public goods funding governance is a concave environment as well, but this is like deep nerdery. Anyway, so that's why DAO. And you always have to decide why DAO before what DAO. And, once we figured that out, we were like, fuck, we built it all wrong. But like, at least we have product market fit and people know Gitcoin. And so we embarked on this long path to decentralize the governance and the computation and the building of the tech stack. And it's like, and the legal structure. Oh my God, like so many lawyers. But yeah, I mean, I just built it wrong to start. And that's the price that you pay when you need to pivot, I guess, is moving along. And, as to how you do it, I really think that we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. Like ERC20 is what is the basis of Compound DAI. And Compound built this governance structure where you could delegate to people in the token. And then Uni made it into an airdrop. And Gitcoin's like small innovation on top of that structure of governance. By the way, Gitcoin's a Uni fork, which is a Compound fork, which is built on top of ERC20. Like we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. And our like little way that we pushed the space forward was that we noticed that like a lot of the delegation governance systems that were out there had very little delegate participation because you had to actually, after you got your airdrop, you had to go to like a delegation site and click self-delegate in order to even use your tokens. And no one was fucking doing that. In the Gitcoin airdrop, we made you either say, I'm going to participate in governance. And we put these really hard, complicated governance questions in front of you. And then we were like, you can opt out of governance by delegating to someone that you trust. And basically what that did was that collapsed all 18,000 token holders into 40 people who could actually be involved in governance. And, like I said before, the consent of the governed is the only legitimate basis of governance in the space. So now you have the users of Gitcoin being governed by Gitcoin, and there's actually high governance participation. And, at the time in January 2021, when we were planning the Gitcoin DAO launch, like everyone wanted governance tokens, but no one wanted to govern anything, which is like the dirty secret of why this is so hard. But anyway, yeah, the DAO launched with a treasury of 50 million GTC, and the DAO, using its governance structure, could allocate that funding to the DAO's missions. And that's basically the governance structure. And then you layer on a quarterly cadence on top of that, where we do one Gitcoin grants round per quarter. And then there's a retrospective, and then there's governance, and the tokens are allocated to the teams. And then you just repeat the whole thing. So it becomes this iterative, evolutionary experience of evolving governance and evolving the platform every quarter. Yeah, I mean, you asked me about some of the challenges with DAO governance. There's probably a lot that we could explore there, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, I'd love to get into that. I'm curious if there were other potential paths to transitioning to a DAO, how you were distributing ownership or governance that you had explored. Or was it just sort of like that was the obvious one that you had a big focus on iterating over what was working already?
Yeah, I mean, pre-launch, it was a lot of exploring different DAO frameworks, both legal and the software tools that were on the market. There's probably like a parallel universe where instead of cede, Compound DAI, Gitcoin's like a nouns fork or something like that, like just depending on the timing. Or like, I really like what Optimism has done with bicameral governance, but we just kind of surveyed the space at the time and saw what was available. And then, after launch, it's really a lot of the work that has been had to do is like not upgrading smart contracts associated with governance or anything, but it's been about the social layer of helping to ratify purpose and essential intent. And, the first 3 months of the DAO were just like almost like running around with everyone's hair on fire because no one knew which direction to row, and actually deciding the purpose and the essential intent. And like we had some toxic people that joined the DAO and we just didn't know it until we started working with them, and like flushing those people out. And by the way, how do you even hire and fire in a decentralized org? Also, Kevin has shadow power because he's the CEO of holdings. People act differently around me. So you have to sink into the background and not opine on things and delegate your tokens to the people who are going to be leaders. And so there's a lot of like art and science to that evolution. But yeah, I'm curious where you want to dig in there.
I'm seeing this like conversation bubble up quite a bit. And maybe the extreme is like the idea of removing human beings from DAOs. right? And seeing DAOs as much more of like a vending machine, or at least that's where we should get to. Humans are the problem. We need to get humans out of the way and let incentives and smart contracts run things.
Yeah.
And then in your answer, and I think very much I identify with this as well, like the practical realities of human beings kind of being the purpose of this, like simply supporting human beings or human activity, and definitely being deeply involved in the actual operations of these things. I'm curious where you sort of stand there. Like, is the ideal world for us to get to here one that feels much more like a vending machine that creates value for the world? Or because I think you guys had some interesting experience with human beings coming together to sort of shape this thing.
That's a fun, like, glossing over of Web3 culture is like interesting experiences with human beings. There's a lot of interesting people and interesting stuff going on in DAOs. All right, that was my shitpost answer, but I'll actually sincerely answer your question. Yeah, the people at Orca, Julia Rosenberg and Chase Chapman, have really influenced my thinking here. And the thing that I really think is cool is their idea about Trustware and Socialware in organizations. So basically, Socialware is mechanisms that create assurances through human relationships, incurring a social coordination cost and a trust. I trust that Jess is going to send me some tokens later because he said he was going to. Trustware, as opposed to Socialware, is mechanisms that create assurances through technologies which incur low social coordination cost. And so the real question, like the way I interpret your question, is what things do we want to govern in Socialware versus Trustware? And Gitcoin was kind of created when it was a centralized monolith as fully Socialware. And if we wanted to be credibly neutral to the Web3 community, then how do we break up that trust and decentralize that leadership? Well, the answer is, first, it was modular Socialware. So going from one organization where Kevin's the big bad boss or the big good boss, depending on how things are going, breaking it up into a data science group, a product group, a R&D group, a education group, you get the idea, modular Socialware. And then once you have those modules of trust where everyone kind of has their modular Socialware, then you can start to design at the center of your organism Trustware, which is basically, again, creating assurances through technology. So Gitcoin Grants is going from a transition of being a centralized monolithic platform to being a decentralized modular set of Trustware-based protocols. And so governance now happens via Trustware instead of just in Kevin Owocki's leadership meetings. The grants registry is hosted on a credibly neutral substrate of IPFS and smart contracts. The quadratic funding will be delivered via the round manager protocol. And so you've got this modular Trustware that is now at the center and is delivering that credible neutrality that I think that people need. And so I think it's all trade-offs. And I would really, before you ask, how do we remove humans from something, you really have to ask why would you remove them? And again, it goes back to Vitalik's post for me. If it's better decision making in a concave environment, if you need decentralization, censorship resistance, or credible neutrality, then remove the people from it. If not, fucking enjoy the people. Like, let's all be friends with each other. And like, who cares if we're trusting each other? Trust is like a great part of life when we're in social situations and we're building relationships with each other. I just don't want my like currency or my public goods funding infrastructure to be based off of trust. So that's my nuanced take or like rant on Trustware and Socialware. Does that kind of get at what you were?
Yeah, I think that the nuance is the important thing to get out here in this conversation, because Twitter rips that away.
I feel like if I keep doing like 3 podcasts a day, eventually someone's gonna like find a clip of me and take it out of context, and like I'll get canceled or something like that. But like Kevin doesn't believe in decentralization because I said this
sure, and I think
thing about it.
I think that's the thing that comes out, right? Because I think I very much. I love human beings, and I love the trust and creativity and things that happen there. And I think the piece is missing is, I think that you get at it in your answer there, is that it's like, where should that live? And I think what we're seeing right now is that the most exciting DAOs will probably really be leaning into Trustware in those parts that really need to have be high trust and decentralized and not be at the whim of an individual and their feelings in the day. But what that's actually going to do is create immense opportunities at the edges for people to come together to collaborate and coordinate, and in various different organizations. Maybe those are squads, maybe they're other DAOs, maybe they're companies, right? But I think that's like the framing. Like the infrastructure layer is very different than the social layer. And the better we can get at building infrastructure to enable these new things, the more opportunities we have to go do interesting things with people we like.
Yeah. And I think that like the really great promise of this is, how can we build new infrastructure using blockchains? I've been working with Josh Stark a little bit on his essay, Atoms, Institutions, and Blockchains, and like how they all create hardness through various properties. Atoms create hardness in physical matter, like gold. There will only be so much gold on the planet. and that creates certainty in how a monetary system can be based. Institutions use social trust in order to create certainty, and you can be sure that if you pay your taxes, you'll get Social Security when you're older. We hope, because we trust our institutions. And blockchains create assurances through smart contracts and decentralized technology. So ports of hardness create different types of certainty in human society. And I really think that that's fucking cool, because we can build a global, programmable, transparent, and uncorruptible substrate for human coordination. And what kind of things could we build on those rails? Like, we have this idea of Dunbar's number that we can only relate to 5 people intimately, 15 people casually, 150 in a tribe. But like, if technology is a bicycle for the mind and it allows us to go further, faster together, could we have productive social relationships with like 10x or 100x what Dunbar's number is, leveraging better coordination substrate for the world? And like, I think the world is re-indexing from our local communities and coordinating based off of those institutions in our local community to having a global web-based coordination mechanism. And so we're indexing on our interests and what we do for work instead of where we're geographically born, which has its promises and its perils. It's that design space that we're all in the idea maze of, I guess. And it's really kind of exciting to explore, but it's also scary because the world is changing so fast and we only have a certain amount of time to navigate it. And there's pitfalls all over the place.
The phrase that really stood out to me early on in my jump into crypto was this idea of social scalability, right? And I think that's a Nick Szabo thing related to Bitcoin. And I think I've been rolling that around in my head quite a bit as, we do this trade-off. And I think I saw it in sort of the evolution of Gitcoin between like, what is right to do now from a pragmatic point of view, from a get to market, build things, get attention, do the hard work of moving fast, versus, what needs to be true to reach the scale of the potential of what we're working on. I think about that a lot within Seed Club and thinking about sort of social scalability as being a big part of that. And I think that's, just another way of saying it. I think Trustware is attempting to do that. And I don't think we've seen, we have good examples of this working at massive scales, right? So it's very much possible. I think the question is like, how does that chunk down into these more, and I do think that framing of like moving from our location and our cities being the core organizing or identifying principles in our lives to these sort of internet societies or, organizations. And I think that is like, it's like such a subtle thing, but that is a great way of framing just the chaos that people are experiencing right now. It's a major shift in how we organize, probably as large as this sort of shift from rural to urban that we went through through the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, totally. I think that like a really interesting wedge between the two is Trustware that takes Socialware as an input, but gives it a limited governance aperture. And I'll explain what I mean by this. Quadratic funding, the way it works is that you have a Gitcoin grant for Seed Club, and say I have a Gitcoin grant for, I don't know, Moonshot Bots, an NFT I launched or something. If my grant gets $10 from one contributor and your grant gets $10 from 10 contributors, you get 95% of the matching pool. And what's cool about that is that if you look at it from a contributor eye view, if I give $1 to your project, Jess, that's going to have $10 or maybe $100 worth of impact, depending on how big the matching pool is and what other grants are out there. That's a mechanism that's really important because what it does is it decentralizes the allocation of the funding in the ecosystem from, like, say, a central grant administrator who makes all the decisions. It pushes the power out to the edges, to the poor and the many, to the people who are your peers, instead of some power broker who works at the Ethereum Foundation or whatever grant administrator it is. So, but here's my point, and coming back to Trustware that takes in Socialware and uses as an input, but doesn't give it full control, is what we've done with quadratic funding is that we've now built a collective intelligence mechanism where we're measuring which projects do people give enough shits about that they'll give $1 to. By the way, this is different from like liking something or like voting for something. You actually have to give $1. You have to give something out of your own wallet for it. And so you're measuring which things people actually truly care about. And you're putting that through Trustware in order to create a decentralized mesh network of funding preferences, and you're allocating tokens on that. And that to me is cool because it's deeply scalable. You can fund with 1,000 projects with Gitcoin grants in a quarter, but with a team of like 5 or 10 running a grants program centrally, you can't scale that much. Also, you can't engage your community in that collective intelligence mechanism as much as quadratic funding would. And so, quadratic funding has its own problems. Like, ask me about Sybil attacks, buy me a beer sometime and ask me about that. But I guess my point is like Trustware and Socialware can be reconfigured in such a way you can take Socialware as an input, but give it a limited governance aperture. And there's really powerful things that you can do with that too. So the hybrid of the two, I think, is really cool.
Let's jump into civil attack, civil resistance. Like, I think this is a thing that you've been talking about quite a bit, and
Oh no,
obviously
man! I
that's
said you had to buy me a beer first, so you to drown my
well.
sorrows
I
over.
think you had your
civil
sips of
resistance.
tea, so I feel like you're
Yeah.
you're on the pathway here.
Okay.
But I mean, it seems like, so following in your idea here, this idea of socialware plugging into Trustware, like one of the biggest limiting factors in Trustware generally is just how complicated, difficult, challenging, whatever your word is, it is to identify unique actors in the sort of decentralized world that we're playing in. And so maybe if you could just give your best definition of what sort of Sybil Resistance is, and its importance, and then I would love to sort of maybe go into like what that actually unlocks for us.
Yeah, totally. So basically, Gitcoin grants, you have a grant that got $10 from 10 people. I got a grant that had $10 from 1 people. And I'm really fucking pissed. I'm like, Jess is getting all the funding. What the fuck? And then so I break my $10 up into 10 new identities that I break up. Let's call it like Devin Mickwalkie and Evan Owocki. This is about by the way, the level of creativity that most civil attackers have when they attack the system. Like they're just like, oh, I don't know, Kevin Chu funded this. And it genuinely is the identity problem of how do you tell unique people from each other. And there's 4 ways to solve it. I know because I've been doing a lot of deep research on this. You can do it with nation state identities. You can do it with biometrics. You can do it with web of trust, and you can do it with presence based. Like you're in front of me now. You're in my presence. I know that you're a human now because of that. But it doesn't scale. Like when you turn off Riverside and I get a message from Jess Law 7 on Telegram, I don't fucking know if that's you. And also, by the way, when deepfakes happen, it's going to get a lot harder. Anyway, so civil resistance is an important problem to solve because we can go from 1 token, 1 vote DAOs to 1 human, 1 vote DAOs, which, by the way, like most of humanity, their financial lives are their jobs in their community, not their like investments. So if you want Web3 to go mainstream, you have to make it less plutocratic and more democratic. And so this is like a really important money Lego to solve. I didn't choose this problem. This problem chose me by virtue of running Gitcoin, but Gitcoin is now releasing a protocol for civil resistance called Gitcoin Passport. And I gave a talk about it at DevCon. And it's really hairy problem to solve, but I think it's one of the most important research problems in Web3 right now.
Yeah, just the ability to identify an individual versus potential network of bots or bad actors is just such an unlock for the space generally. Everything from how do you decentralize ownership and governance to participation in governance to, it's just like a big building block that I think will unlock a whole lot of value. And it's also something that's had a lot of challenges. Like we've seen a number of different attempts at doing this to, various degrees of success. And I think, many of them are just adding in, so the most traditional one that people are probably familiar with is KYC, right? So you can use your government ID, et cetera. And I would say that's probably the majority of how these teams are trying to solve these issues right now, and in a number of other ones as well. This web of trust through Bright ID and different ways introduced a significant friction into and onboarding into an experience. And so I think people have sort of been slow to adopt that. So I'm curious, what is the approach that Passport is taking and why is this going to work? Maybe.
Oh, I don't make assurances about things working or not. Like, for example, this book that I wrote, Green Pilled, How Crypto Could Regenerate the World. People keep tagging me on threads on Twitter and they're like, Kevin, tell us how crypto is going to save the world. And I'm like, it's not what I said. I said it could. And it's like your job to make it happen. And then I'll write the book about it then. But I mean, maybe we can reason about ways to help address a problem well addressed and well understood is half solved, right? So how can we start understanding how crypto can regenerate the world or how Sybil Resistance can start to be solved? And so basically, I gave this talk at DevCon in which I talked about like the kind of like infinite game, the battle arena between the people who are the Sybil detectors and the Sybil attackers. So basically, you've got a adversarial game theory. You've got a blue team, which is trying to defend Quake Team Fortress or like Counter-Strike. And then you've got the red team that's attacking it. And there's this series of like booby traps and like defenses that the blue team can set up and the red team tries to trip them. And then the whole system resets the next time. And like the red team evolves from what they learned and the blue team evolved from what they learned. And how can we systemically turn the screws on this so that the blue team has a systemic advantage is like how I would reinterpret what you just asked me, which is like, how do we solve Sybil resistance? Because like, we're never actually really going to solve it. We're just going to address it. And if we can create a Sybil resistant economy that is at least the cost of forgery for those addresses is high, we can go from, this is actually an important point. We can go from just protecting against script kiddies to being able to protect against organized crime to like nation state level forgeries. So like increase the cost of forgery so that you need a more sophisticated actor to attack the system, and then only put a certain amount of the matching pool at risk as you ramp up Sybil Resistance, ramp up how much public goods you fund. And so that's kind of how I start to think about the problem. If you want to go deep on Sybil Resistance, click the One Human, One Vote DAO talk that I gave at DevCon, and that's all about how we're approaching it at Passport. But the TLDR is like Gitcoin Passport is a way for you to verify your identity across a bunch of different vectors. And then like you basically try to get the quadratic funding every quarter through Gitcoin. There's a data analytics team that monitors for Sybil attacks and suspicious behavior, and that updates back Gitcoin Passport, and they can submit through governance a fraud report, and governance can decide whether or not those people actually get that funding or not. So there's like a whole battleground that we're kind of like managing with Gitcoin grants in order to try to address the problem.
I think even just framing it at that level is just fascinating and gives people a window into, like, it's not just here's this simple tool that we'll build and flip a switch and it's solved. It is a very complex dynamic space to be playing in. And we'll definitely include a link to your presentation at DevCon in the show notes here. The thing that I'm very personally interested in is this period of transition that you have gone through here in the last little while, sort of stepping back. And it sounds like it's been an ongoing thing in the DAO. Earlier, you're mentioning just the importance of sort of, I guess, the recognition of the social capital and power that is inherent in this organization, that because of how long you've been there and the information asymmetry that sort of naturally comes with that. So I'm curious if you can sort of dive into a little bit of the thinking behind your transition of sort of stepping back, and how have you done that in a progressive way? Because like framing it as the opposite side, probably big idea from Silicon Valley in the last 20 years, it's this idea that entrepreneurs should be the ones running companies rather than CEOs being parachuted in, which was sort of the old way of building these businesses. So there's definitely a risk when a leader who has been so core to the success of these organizations step back.
Yeah. My first thought was like, oh, well, like the only constant is change, man. Like maybe like a pithy Buddhism quote or something, and just starting with that, which is, partially true.
Yeah, but we won't let you get away with just that answer.
I mean, so here's actually another soundbite that I gave on the day of the DAO launch. Like, people always talk about decentralization of power, but no one's ever talking about decentralization of stress. Like, I was on the verge of like panic attacks and like stress rage coding out of every problem during Gitcoin Grants 1, and like my team was all burnt out from the bear market, and like we had a bunch of governance problems with being inside of Consensus when they're doing several successive rounds of layoffs. By the way, I'm very thankful to Joe Lubin and Consensus for funding Gitcoin and believing in us. They're amazing partners, but it was very hard to be there during a contraction period, especially a prolonged contraction period. And so decentralization of stress and decentralization of power go hand in hand. And I just really believed in the why of decentralizing Gitcoin, building the consent of the governed into it, building more credible neutrality, building more concave decision-making into it, are all things I believe in. And so you just got to kind of follow that, I think, and remind yourself every day that even though it's going to be hard, that you have to persist and keep showing up. And, it's hard, but you know what else is fucking hard? Building 5 side projects that no one gives a fuck about and like launching it and hearing crickets. That was way worse than decentralizing Gitcoin and giving up power. Like, now, like, I've touched the lives of thousands of people, and Gitcoin has made the world a better place. And people come up to me at hackathons in EthCC or DevCon and they say like, thanks, Gitcoin got me through a rough period during the bear market. And it's like, I don't know, it's that kind of shit that keeps you going. But I also like, I don't know, maybe I'm like not a good Web 2 style CEO because I don't like to say no to stuff. I don't like being the decision maker on the team. Like, governance problems are stress. Like, I love it when people tag me and they're like, hey, Kevin, is this a Gitcoin grant? And, or is this Gitcoin grant a public good? And I can just say, I don't know, not my fucking problem. Go talk to governance. Like, that's awesome. I don't want that power. That control is liability. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's the way I think about it. But, if I was maybe had a different personality or didn't have that experience, maybe I would try to hold on to Gitcoin a little bit more. But maybe another like thing to put in the pot is like, if you love something, let it go, set it free. And maybe there's a little bit of that in it too.
So the decentralization of stress and responsibility, I think that's like has a lot of resonance for me. I mean, I think many people that are building early stage things, what I hear in your answer is a commitment to a much bigger thing. And I think, I very much identify with that as well. And then also just sort of like really with intellectual honesty, explore what needs to be true for that bigger thing to come to life in that bigger way. And I think distributing responsibility and ownership and stress and all these sort of things. And, it to me is like the only path towards that larger vision, assuming that we keep the idea of like the crypto mentality in place, which I think most listening to this podcast would agree with. It's not surprising to me that you're like, I don't need this power. I don't want this power. I think there's massive value to be created, both in impact and maybe other ways through distributing this power and responsibility, which I think is maybe a better word here. But I'm curious, like, what needed to be in place in your mind for you to be comfortable doing that? Because if we take it from a responsibility lens, like you just stepping back from something without making sure that it was in a good place would be probably very much against your ethics, morals, and desires.
Yeah, I guess the analogy that comes to mind to me is, by the way, I have small kids, but I don't have any college age kids. But like, I remember a couple of my friends from high school, like going to college and leaving the house, and then like they would flunk out, or like they would get too drunk and would get arrested, and their parents would have to bail them out. Like, it's a little bit of like, here's a little taste of freedom, don't fuck it up, and if you do fuck it up, we're gonna tighten the leash. And it feels a little bit like that at first, but Gitcoin has an iterative structure, and it's up to the governance to decide how to evolve it forward. I think that there was a good period for 12 months after the DAO launch of just getting the right butts in the right seats and removing the wrong butts from those seats and building that social cohesion and the culture and the purpose and the essential intents. So basically the timeline is that Gitcoin DAO launches in May of 2021. These work streams form that are designed to administer the grants program, do product, do fraud defense, and do governance. And like, honestly, like, we recruited a lot of people. Hey, you want to come work for this DAO thing, like, and get paid in tokens? Like, it's kind of new and weird for people. And so at first we were kind of just like begging people to work for the DAO. And as a result, we hired some bad people. Like, they weren't bad people, but they were bad for the roles that we gave them, or we didn't set them up for success. And so, maybe in like Q3 or Q4, we realized there's a couple of people that aren't working out, and you have to use governance to remove them. And it's kind of sloppy and messy. And we also just getting the right butts in the right seat. So May 2021, the DAO launches. Every quarter there's a grants round and there's governance that goes along with it. And there's kind of a political economy over who gets funding based off of that. And in June of 2022, the Gitcoin Holdings, which was the company that was around at the launch of the DAO, formally transferred the trademark and all IP associated to Gitcoin to the Gitcoin Foundation, which is a nonprofit entity which stewards is the legal wrapper for the DAO. And that's why we renamed the company from Gitcoin Holdings to Supermodular, because they own the Gitcoin trademark now. And now I'm like completely disaffiliated from leadership. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's a long period of iterative trial and error. To use my college metaphor, Gitcoin DAO flunking out and getting arrested a couple times, but now they're off and they're passing all their courses and they're going to graduate to Grants 2.0 soon, I hope.
Yeah, I love it. And especially, you're navigating this transition through a bull and into the beginning of a bear market, right? And I think that, led to, one of the big challenges that I see in DAOs generally, and I don't know how these persist or not, but this idea of the difficulty of saying no. I'm curious how, because I know you had to navigate that through a period of time when you went from abundance into one where we actually had to make some hard decisions, maybe around people, but definitely around how to fund and what's the right amount to fund and where should we prioritize. I'm curious if you could sort of walk through the pieces that you think contributed to being able to say no.
Well, I mean, the framing of it is that Gitcoin is an iterative evolutionary ecosystem, and every quarter there's a grants round, and then there's a retrospective on that, and then there's governance on the next quarter. And then there's tokens released, and then there's another grants round, there's a retro. So it's recursive, right? And so the whole idea is to make the DAO suck less every time it goes through that iteration. And so, I mean, I think that I would say that the bull market in a DAO is like, it's like a game of musical chairs where like the music keeps going. And so you don't have to make the hard choice of who gets off the boat. Or another example is like if you're in space and there's no gravity. And then when the bear market hits, the music stops and gravity kicks in and you see who's like not contributing really, or has been running in a million different directions, but not really shipping anything. And I'd say that when the Three Arrows Capital thing happened, and what was it, 3AC, and then like within a week it was like 3 Arrows Capital and UST, and ETH went down to like $800 from like 2000. That was the oh shit moment where Gitcoin DAO was spending like $1.3 million per month and not shipping grants protocol. And like I say that with all love and respect for Gitcoin, like it was trying to do too much and like funding too much. It was running grants rounds, which is great, but it just wasn't capital efficient at all. And that's what forced like, hey, like the hard decision is either we kind of like get our shit together and focus and push out people who aren't working. And I'm saying we, because at the time I was involved in DAO leadership, or Gitcoin might fail. Like And that's what drives the hard decision. One thing I'll say that is pretty like sanity inducing for me is that you only have to make those hard decisions for 2 weeks out of every quarter. And so you can kind of let your guard down and like work for the rest of the quarter. And then during governance season, that's when a lot of like the political economy stuff kicks up and you have to actually worry about those hard decisions. Hard decisions are necessary. One of the things I learned early on in being a founder is, I don't know if you ever read this, but if you take a cold shower every morning when you're taking a shower, then that's going to be the worst moment of your day because you're got like ice water raining down upon you and your body is viscerally revolting from being under ice water. And so if you ever have to fire someone, or if you ever need to have an uncomfortable conversation with a partner, or things aren't going well, just take a fucking cold shower in like the morning and it'll be the worst thing you have to do all day and you won't like have any aversion to having the cold shower anymore. And so I know there's a lot of cold showers during the market dip, I guess you could say.
I'm curious what your experience was like of how either delegates or the community stepped up in that time of challenge. Because again, I think that it can be traditionally, I think the belief is that leadership is in the place to make those hard decisions. Boards are in that place to make a hard decision. And now, in a DAO, the board is your delegates or is your broader token holder. So did you get a lot of that sort of energy from the community towards making those hard decisions, or was there a friction pushback on that?
So Gitcoin's fucked up a lot of things, but one thing that I think that it's always been very good at is starting with why. Digital public goods, more regenerative crypto, helping communities meet their shared needs are all different mission or purpose statements that I've heard out of Gitcoin over the years. And people give a fuck. Like it just means so much to me. I think I said earlier, like the worst thing was when I was building side projects no one cared about. And I think that it's like the mission and the fact that Gitcoin has helped so many people to act like earnestly show up when Gitcoin needed them if it was well structured. And by the way, if it's well structured is a very loaded question that has many perspectives. But no, I mean, the delegates really care about Gitcoin and making it successful and seeing Grant's protocol launching. The most meta thing is like when you talk about how it's all coordination and we're going to coordinate the world, but you have a coordination failure inside of your DAO. And so correcting that, put on your own mask before you give your mask to others kind of thing. Yeah. It just took a little while for the DAO to get to know each other, understand what its operating system was, its purpose and essential intent and stuff like that. And people showed up because they gave a shit about Gitcoin, I think. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Grant's protocol, they've announced that it's going to launch in the next 3 months. And I have no more information than anyone else who's on the outside of it. But I think that that's going to be the real proof is in the pudding moment about has the decentralization of governance and computation, development, and legal actually paid off? Like, is Grant's protocol going to fly? Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't want to call what Gitcoin's done a great success until the protocol has replaced the centralized platform. But, the cool thing is that I'm going to go like office space printer on that C platform when it's done. Like, we're going to take it out back and damn, it feels good to be a gangster, smash it, because that spaghetti code, it needs to be exited. The guy who wrote it didn't even write tests for his code. Can you believe that?
Shocking. I can see the video already, though. I think that'll be maybe a great meme for the community. Well, Kevin, I appreciate you sort of sharing the shape of where this came from. I think there's just a lot of richness in both how you shared the story and the decisions and just how iterative this process has been. And I think will continue to be. One of the things that's so wonderful about these organizations building in public is that there's just this record and richness that you can go into. So like diving into the Gitcoin forum and seeing the governance decisions and the processes there, just through osmosis, you will become a better operator and explorer of the DAO space. So I recommend people go do that. So in the last minute here or so, where should we direct people? Like, you're working on some new things. I see people are offering for you to come to partner with them, where you bring the money, you bring the devs, and you bring the idea, and they want to just retweet you. It's a spicy take on your Twitter recently. But where can we direct people, or what would you like to put on people's radars?
I want to build a movement of more regenerative crypto economics. I believe that we can program our values into our money, and we can build monetary systems that reflect our values. That's the great peril and promise of Web3 is that, like, if you value Ponzi schemes, you can build those. But also if you build solving climate change and funding open source and helping change the way we work, you can do that also. And so we can program our values into our money. Let's rotate capital and talent into a more regen Web3 movement. So that means people who are having impact on the world, positive impact on the world. So if you go to greenpill.party, you can check out the podcast that I run that you've been on, Jess. And we're kind of trying to build a movement there. And if you follow me on Twitter, I'm twitter.com/Owocki, Owocki. Yeah, join the movement. Let's build a more regen Web3.
Amazing. Thanks, Kevin.
Sweet. Thanks for having me.
Hello, friends. Steph here, Media Team Steward at Seed Club. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review Building at the Edges. This helps other Web3 builders discover these valuable insights. And tell us what you think on Twitter. Tag us at @CClubHQ. Thanks for listening. See you on the internet.